Greetings all. Welcome to our webinar, Breaking Through Technical Debt and Fragmented Architectures. And this is hosted by Data Products. In this webinar, we will address common modernization roadblocks, hybrid on-prem to cloud transitions, legacy system sprawl, and poor data quality. And thank you all for joining. With us today, we have Dr. Mechie Nkengla and Michael Pompey. Just a little bit on both our presenters. Dr. Mechie Nkengla is a PhD mathematician, AI and data executive, whose career is built on one conviction: AI fails when the infrastructure beneath it was built for the wrong people. As director of EY's Global Data Science Center of Excellence, she led AI transformations across 4 continents. Through Data Products LLC, she now advises Fortune 500 federal agencies and health and finance organizations on data strategy modernization, legacy architecture overhaul, and AI readiness. She holds multiple patents in applied AI systems and is based in Chicago. Hi, Mechie.
Hi.
And co-presenting with Mechie is Michael Pompey, AI evangelist at Arrow Electronics and former CIO. He's on a mission to close the gap between AI hype and execution. He challenges organizations to stop experimenting and start delivering value, using governance as the foundation for moving fast without breaking things. Michael believes AI doesn't have to be about replacing people, but instead can be about elevating people and their roles in the age of AI. Thank you for joining us, Michael.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
And to kick us off, please, Dr. Nkengla.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm very happy to be here today. Today, we're here to talk about technical debt and the fragmented architectures. What I'll start out with saying is we keep treating technical debt as an IT problem. It is not. It's a leadership failure that was designed. The longer boards avoid naming it, the more expensive that silence really gets, right? So the first starting point, I want to talk about the true cost of technical debt, right? So the American Enterprise Institute did some research that quantifies that technical debt in the US economy at roughly $2.4 trillion annually, right? That's quite a number. And that $2.4 trillion annually will require an estimated of $1.5 trillion to remediate. That figure is almost certainly understated. If you've been in any corporate environment or multiple corporate environment, you understand how true and deep technical debt runs, because most organizations never model it like a discrete risk line. Michael, what do you make of that?
You know what? It's interesting, because as CIO, and as other tech leaders, this is something that we not only understand and grapple with. And I think one of the interesting things about this topic related to technical debt is, what is it actually? I think a lot of times we might be using that term in a bunch of different ways and casting a wider net than we should be. But it's something that, again, if it's not addressed, if it's not planned for, if it's not even communicated about, can not only hamper an application, but it can actually hamper an organization's ability to move at speed. And that's what comes to mind when I hear you read off those stats.
I absolutely agree. I feel like most organizations are not necessarily underinvesting in technology. They're over-investing in the past and calling it maintenance.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? When you think about, that the whole concept of technical debt, right? So, if you don't mind, I'd like to take just a little quick step back and just really kind of, define what it is we're talking about. So for those that are on the call and if you're unfamiliar with that term, or you think you know the term, right? What technical debt really is are those ways that we sometimes take care of an issue or address a need or a problem or a functionality by taking a shortcut in an application. It was first coined back in a day where folks are trying to explain why you can't roll out additional advancements and improvements in software as quickly as the initial ones. And because sometimes we may take shortcuts in our coding, someone might hard code a variable, and at some point you need to go back and fix that. Well, if you don't, this need to maintain your code base is going to grow and grow, and it becomes like a debt. And over time, it becomes so big that it can actually hamstring not only your application, but your company. But the interesting thing about debt is that debt sometimes is known and sometimes you use it going forward. But if you don't keep control of it, right, whether it be your credit cards or something else, it can eat you alive. So that's kind of what we're talking about here as it relates to our systems, our infrastructures, is how this sometimes goes unnoticed and untalked about and what that actually drags on an organization.
Absolutely. And I'll add a bit of color to that, right? So when I'm talking about technical debt, that's a great example that Michael shared. But I'll expand that definition a little bit and in terms of adding a bit more color. If you think about any migration, think about hybrid cloud tangles, where you're doing hybrid cloud versus on-prem. Think about legacy sprawl, right? You have some code that's been in existence for God knows when, only team that comes in once a year and knows how to fix, nobody touches anything. Think about broken data quality. That's a really, really big one. All of that ties to technical debt.
Definitely, yeah. And the interesting thing about that, so having run software development teams, I understand fair well that tension that shows up, which sometimes requires technical debt. So you may have the business pushing for a particular functionality or a particular feature. You've got your dev teams who, I always say, developers are my favorite kind of children, right? They want everything to line up. They want it to be perfect. They want to write the most elegant code. And now we've got that constraint related to time. Well, where are we going to push? Where are we going to fold? Right? Where we're going to move? And sometimes it shows up in how we get things taken care of. But what's interesting, and I know we're going to get to it in our conversation, are those places where this concept of technical debt can show up almost as an advantage, but how to balance the two so it doesn't kind of strangle you, right? Because if you think about some of the ways software is developed now, the first person out, right? The first person out the gate with a functionality, the first person that can actually address a need, sometimes is the most important piece, but sometimes that incurs a large debt payment to go along with moving that fast.
Right. And as a CIO, I'm sure you see this, right? I know in boardrooms, this is very common. These are the creative things that are talked about quite consistently. You have delivery timelines that consistently run over estimate, right? Infrastructure teams that are permanently at capacity despite growing headcounts, right? You have modernization programs that never quite make it past the planning stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of this is attributed really to that technical debt. And I would like to cap that off by saying this is really not a vendor problem when you see these things I list that are talked about in boardrooms. It's a governance vacuum driven by that technical debt.
Right.
Also,
right.
the second point. Also, the second point I want to talk about untangling the hybrid versus on-prem to cloud transitions, because that's a common place where we find technical debt. The common truth about cloud migration. I think that's something that everyone has touched on or was experienced in some fashion. So most hybrid to cloud projects fail. Why? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not because the cloud is the wrong destination, but because the organizations that move the problem from on-prem to cloud, they don't solve it by doing so. So it's a lift and shift, the same fragmented architecture, which is the issue, into a different environment, and then they wonder why the cloud is not giving them the benefits that they expected to materialize.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the lift and shift and trying to replicate the same sort of legacy architecture or disconnected architecture that you had on-prem and doing it in the cloud. And I've seen some of the same things happen with AI projects, right? Folks try to replicate and automate a broken, inefficient human system leveraging AI and missing the piece about being transformational. And it's interesting, sometimes folks, and I've got this saying about, tell the whole truth. Don't necessarily tell the whole truth about their current environments and infrastructure. So when they go to migrate and they go to push the cloud, their partner vendor thinks they're going to be moving, a particular type of environment, but what's actually in play and what they've actually patched together is completely different. And I know sometimes tongue in cheek, I will get a little ribbing from, fellow CIOs and would say, Mike, why are you telling all my business in the street and things of that nature? But the reality is that sometimes in order to keep our on-prem environments running, we've done a bunch of different things as CIOs and tech leaders to keep the lights on. And some of those things have been by hook or by crook. Some of them actually have been designed. And I can tell you on the public sector side, the most enterprising tech leaders are the ones that have had to make, working with less actually happen, which means cobbling together a bunch of different things with the proverbial duct tape and baling wire. And if you try to replicate that and not account for it and not tell the whole truth about it, yes, your migration to the cloud to being hybrid is going to be much more complicated than folks believed it should, because folks never understood how much technical debt and legacy infrastructure you actually had. You were the miracle worker, which is great, but folks believe that miracles were easy. And if we're not upfront letting folks know the true cost of these miracles and our ability to move and accelerate later, then we can find ourselves handcuffed by those innovative solutions that we actually had to deploy to get the job done.
Absolutely, right. And I'll take a gander at simplifying for this particular migration perspective, right? The infrastructure beneath the migration determines what it delivers, period.
Period.
Right. And the way I think about it like 4 different layers that need to be examined before you touch a single workload. We're talking about the governance. We're talking about the data literacy in the team that is executing the migration. We're talking about the technical infrastructure underpinning it. And of course, then there's the AI and automation systems that are sitting on top of that. Those are the 4 different layers that must be evaluated before anything is actually touched. And organizations
two of those layers, Mechie, are the things that nobody wants to pay for. No one wants to pay for data stuff, right? People pay for governance when they have to. And so at the end of the day, if you're not having what you mentioned, right? If you're not having that conversation at the board level with folks that actually understand and you're communicating, those things are going to catch you. They're going to catch you at the end. They always do.
How many teams do we know have data literacy? They don't. Just keep it, right? This is a team that's actually doing the migration, right? And the technical infrastructure, and then they wonder why it's broken or why they're not reaping the profits that they expected to materialize. It's incredible.
Well, you said something at the beginning, right? Because you had mentioned something, because you threw in the C word, right? Culture.
Right.
That's a big thing. And what's interesting is, as we move forward, more into the sort of agentic AI era, how often that 10 inches from the keyboard need related to how we as humans work and communicate together keeps showing up. And I think it's a bill that's, depending on your organization, is going to need to come due and get paid. It's sticky, but it's human, and it's going to be necessary for those tech leaders to really leverage both sets of assets, right? The AI automation data side, as well as their workforce. But it's the piece that's it's so new for folks that, people are kind of hesitant to wade into it.
And really, the most dangerous version of this, and we've all seen it, especially you've been a part of, post-acquisition environments. Right? You acquire a company, you inherit 3 years of decisions that you did not make. The only path through is a data environment audit before you integrate, not after. But honestly speaking, talking about CIOs and tech leaders' business up in the street there, how often does that happen before?
It does. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with an organization a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about just some of these challenges. And my first thought was, okay, wasn't that on your discovery? It'd probably been a good thing to find out before you decided to buy this company. But I already know your solution. You're not going to be given the money to rip and replace it all in one shot. That's not going to happen, particularly if you got a lot of PE money behind you, right? A lot of some of these folks are looking to sort of, flip it and balance the sheet and get out of it. So it requires a different approach into fixing all of that. But yes, you're 100% right. Knowing what you're getting into, knowing what it's going to actually take, putting your hands in it and seeing what's underneath the hood, and then making a decision to say, okay, well, here's how we're going to address and mitigate these things. I mean, there are some approaches to doing this that take into account the inability to rip and replace that can get you to a better state. But it needs to be purposeful, and it has to be planful. Otherwise, you're just going to carry this weight along with you.
That's a really lovely segue onto the next point I want us to talk about, which is the legacy sprawl and the post-acquisitions environment in general. So my take is this: legacy systems are a human problem, just not only a technical one, right? There's a 2025 CAS report that analyzed over 10 billion lines of code. across 3,000 organizations. And he found that global technical debt has reached 61 billion workdays in repair time. Let me take a second and repeat that. 61 billion workdays in repair time. Now, if you imagine that we have about 25 million developers in the world, estimated, right? If all those 25 million developers in the world worked on nothing but this problem, it would still take about 9 years to resolve. Right.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and
That's interesting. That's interesting.
let me give you a good one.
Okay.
Think about COBOL. We all know about COBOL. COBOL is a
Yes, we
language
do.
that's 60 years old, right? And there are about
Yes.
220 billion lines of COBOL in active use today. This is a 60-year-old language, and there are 220 billion with a B lines of
Hmm.
code that are in active use. And this
Hmm.
is most prevalent in financial services government, powering an estimate of 3 trillion daily commerce. That is scary.
It is, it can be scary. Let me just say that, right? Because here's the thing I will also say. Um, a 65 Mustang is also old, but it sells for $700,000 because it represents something. And I think, when you think about that idea of the 61, billion, hours required, some of that
Work
stuff,
days.
yeah, yeah, some of that stuff doesn't need to be fixed, doesn't need to be rebuilt as is, right? This is where I think the transformation piece sometimes gets lost with tech leaders that say, okay, I need to convert all of this into something brand new. When the brand new requires a different level of thinking and will operate completely differently. And if you were to take all of that and convert it to something brand new, you might actually get something less efficient than what you had before.
True,
Right.
true.
And so one of the things that I will sometimes, push back a little bit for folks related to some of the legacy things is that some of the legacy stuff just works as is. And the question is, how planful and how purposeful as an IT leader are you about looking at the things that you have in your house and deciding from a business perspective, from an investment perspective, where you're going to make your next move? Because you can't take everything with you. And I think sometimes because, and I'm going to say the truth, right? I'm going to put everybody's business in the street. Sometimes tech leaders in the past might not necessarily have been incentivized to have that mindset as they were deploying technology and standing things up. That opportunity was lost, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way going forward. That's the piece I would definitely want to tell anybody. And listen, we've got some great tools that are coming to market that can help an organization. If you've got legacy code that you need to scan and document and inference and stuff like that, that can definitely leverage some of the power of AI out there, and not the general stuff that you see online, on the web and the consumer grade. I'm talking enterprise class tools to help an organization get a handle on what they've got. I mean, we've got things right around the corner that can help with that. So that 61 billion, we might be able to shrink that a little bit in the next coming quarters.
Fair enough, right? And so to cap this off, I want to talk about at least this point. I want to talk about the governance decision here, right? Who owns the cleanup? Who has the authority to decommission? Who is
Oh,
accountable when something breaks?
I'm gonna give you two
Right?
answers
This
to
has to
that.
make. Go ahead, please.
I'm gonna give you two answers to that, right? Because you said the governance issue, who's responsible, right? I'm gonna tell you what often happens, and I'm gonna tell you the truth. All right, if it's a
Okay.
governance perspective, in theory, the organization, and that means the leader is ultimately responsible for that. Now, what often happens is that gets shifted to whoever's closest to the problem. So if you've got a legacy application or you've got legacy infrastructure that's put together to bailing wire, that's going to get shunted to the CTO or the CIO that you've got to deal with this. But the reality is there were a number of business decisions, business compromises that led the organization to that state. And in theory, those same leaders or heads should also be responsible for the strategy for repairing it, but often they aren't. So it falls to the tech leader to figure out how to do it. Is that fair? I'm not going to say. Is that reality? Yes. So we need to give them a strategy on how to work with the reality as well as change the game going forward. So these things are called out and that all of the folks that have a responsibility are identified so that in the next iteration of this, because it never goes away, and the next iteration of this, Now everyone has a stake at the game and can have a conversation and be involved with the remediation of this going forward.
So what I'm hearing from you is to cap this is that from the who owns the cleanup, who owns this, it should be everyone. And therefore, if everyone owns it, then everyone is accountable if something breaks. And everyone, go ahead.
Yeah, and let me put a fine point on that. All right. So when I say, okay, everyone, needs to be at the table, that does not mean everyone's fixing the code. Of course not, right? We're not going to say, hey, I want your marketing people, or your HR people putting their hands in the code. That's not what I'm talking about. Yes, you're still going to have developers. You're still going to have folks that are technical, that are going to be responsible for, moving a lot of the technical things. What I'm saying is, if you've got an issue and you know that, okay, hey, and rolling out the next set of advancements or the next set of functionality, we need to shave 10 to 15% of our sprint to deal with backlog technical debt, that everyone understands that. So what that may mean is the tech leader saying, hey, we need to deal with these particular things by this time, or you may have an issue with your system going down on Black Friday. Now you have everyone's attention. That's the piece where folks need to be involved in the planning of not only the new stuff, but addressing the previous things where we had gaps. Now, I'm also going to say something that is going to make some of my CIO friends a little upset, but I told you I was going to tell the truth. Not all of the stuff that's in your application that you're calling technical debt is actually technical debt. Some of it is messy code and shortcuts that shouldn't have been done in the first place. I will say that. And listen, I've been guilty of it back in my days as a database dev, right? And it wasn't that, hey, I was under some constraint. And so I made the decision to take a shortcut in order to gain functionality early. That is debt. But I hard coded something because that was easy. It's not debt. That is laziness. And a lot of the stuff that folks are calling technical debt is actually messy code and laziness. And we need to distinguish the two. And so here's the metaphor I give tech leaders so they can distinguish the two. Think about buying a home. All right. Think about buying a home, right? You're buying a home. It's in a market. The market is going up. You make the decision to buy a home now to pay extra piece because you know that, hey, I'm in an area that's going to increase in value, and at time I will get a payback for this, right? That is a practical use, a strategic use of basically borrowing against the future, right? With an application or with your infrastructure, if you say, hey, we need to get this functionality out so we can be the first to market to this thing that our customer needs, and you take shortcuts to get that done, that is debt. You're saying, hey, I want to move fast now and pay more later, the cleanup, in order to get to the market and to secure a strategic advantage. That is debt. But if you've got shoddy development practices and no one's reviewing your code, devs aren't commenting, right? Folks are reusing the same code versus consulting and calling a module and things like that. That's just shoddy workmanship. You can't call that debt. That's basically a payday loan on your application that you incurred unnecessarily. That's the difference.
Okay. Speaking of cleanup, let's talk about data quality, right? Improving data, because that's a huge technical debt driver, right? The data quality is where AI projects go to die, right? So this is the most urgent message that I'm going to bring from my advisory work that I do with Fortune 500s, SMBs, governments, and whatnot. Organizations invest in AI and then discover that the model works, but the data running on it doesn't. Right? There's a 2025 IBM Institute for Business Value report that found that 43% of chief operations officers identify data quality issues as their most significant data priority, right? Like over a quarter of these organizations estimate that they lose more than 5 million annually due to data quality, with about 7% reporting losses of 25 million or more. Gartner, on the other hand, puts this at 12.9 million per organization. McKinsey finds that data quality leads to 20% decrease in productivity. So it's the same story over and over in different versions. I have this principle I call the 110-100 principle, right? And it's the one I tend to use and I advise you to use in every data quality conversation. So when you're fixing a data quality issue at the point of entry, it costs 1 unit. Mm-hmm. If you're fixing it after it propagates through the system, it costs 10 units. If you're fixing it after it's reached a decision maker or an AI model, it costs 100 units, right? Mm-hmm. That math is not a complicated math, The problem most organizations is with most organizations, they did not discover the issue until sat 100.
Yeah. Or your tech was so good at hiding that that you were able to move without knowing it. Now, listen, at the end of the day, you're right, right? You got 1, 10, 100. What's often going to happen, and I'm sure you've heard it as you spoke about it, yeah, I don't care. We need to move.
Correct.
Right? Get it good enough and let's move. Can't you automate some script or do something on the back end to clean it up? I'm sure if there's any data or DBAs, or folks that have background, how many times you've had to run cleanup scripts on things that shouldn't have happened because there was a call from above to make it work, right? And again, if you're saying make it work on purpose to move, that is debt. If you're saying make it work because you don't feel like dealing with the underlying issues that gave you the bad data to begin with, right? Poorly designed applications, no appropriate data map before you designing ETL systems, things of that nature, then again, that's a payday loan. And at the end of the time, you are right. You fix it now or you can fix it later. Folks usually choose later. They usually choose later.
No, this is a great conversation. I want to allow for a few questions before we run off.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you. We do have a few. So with the time that we have, we can do some questions and then some takeaways from both of you to wrap up. So here's one question. How can organizations leverage AI in relation to technical debt?
Excellent.
That's a good one. Michael, why don't you start with that? Yeah.
All right. So yeah, real quick. So a lot of organizations are fearful of losing talent and the older generations of folks who may have built these things in COBOL walking out their doors and not being able to have the tools or even just the background with it. One of the things I was saying is that there are a lot of products now that are on the market, right? Project Bob is one of them that's going to be coming out that's available that can leverage the power of these systems, right? These large LLMs, right? That know every single code base, that have looked at, trillions of lines of data that can help you walk through and assess what you have, what may be broken, where things might be inefficient, which again shines a light on areas where you might need to think differently, right? Those are some of the ways that AI can definitely and is showing folks the speed, not only in generating, but fixing older things and helping a company decide, where should we put the limited chips that we would have in place further. And again, there are products that will also take a look at your data environment, right? Where do you have things that are inconsistent? Where do you have things that don't match your tolerances, right? We've got the ability to now to deploy automated solutions to allow us to get a lot closer to just what this technical debt egg looks like versus us dragging a big question mark to the future. So that's what I would say about that really quickly.
Let me add my 2 cents, right? I think of AI as the most powerful tool today that's available, especially for technical debt. That's a real opportunity. And frankly, also the most dangerous if the debt is not addressed first before AI is implemented. I see the productive use of AI in this context threefold. The first one is AI as a diagnostics tool, right? So using it to run, to map code bases, surface dependencies, flag securities and vulnerabilities, prioritize remediation that needs to happen. Like that diagnosis tool, that's the one cool way that I see it. The second way is AI as a modernization accelerant, right? So the code generation you're talking about, automation testing, documentation of undocumented legacy systems. That's a great way I see it, right? So the caveat is these tools require clean inputs, I should say, to produce reliable outputs. But that's a good way I see leveraging AI for technical debt. The third way is AI as a forcing function. And this is a great one because everyone wants to be in AI. And this is really impactful, especially when I use it with senior leaderships or boards. So if you're serious about AI strategy, this is what I say. And every organization I work with says they are, rightly or wrongly, true or false, right? You have now given yourself a non-negotiable reason to clean up your data foundation. AI does not tolerate data that has data quality problems, right? In that sense, like any AI investment may be the best thing that ever happened to your modernization backlog because it's the force to reckon with. Like it turns a nice to have, which is how people view more technical debt, to a must have if you want to actually have something tangible with your AI results.
Thank
Yes.
And there's another question. This one I thought was very interesting. Is all technical debt bad? Or
Mm.
always bad, I should say.
So, no, not all technical debt is bad if you treat it like what the term is, right? A debt against the future, which requires planning and being purposeful about what you do and why you do it. So you may make the decision to move fast and to move into the market early, and know that, okay, I'm going to need to reserve and pay back the interest on your ability to move faster by addressing it in the past. I think a lot of organizations never look at it that way and just carry it along and never pay it down so that it grows. But just like, buying a home or, investing in an education is an investment to the future. Yes, you incur a debt in the time period while you're doing it, but the hopes are that the payoff is greater than the debt you incur up front. The same thing can happen with our technology and with our functionalities and applications if we approach it from the same mindset versus the knee-jerk reaction oftentimes to shortcut for the sake of speeds, and not necessarily look at why you're doing it and how you're going to account for it in the future. And I think that's the piece where you can leverage this concept of technical debt differently and purposefully within your environments.
Yes. So my take is right along that, right? So technical debt is not inherently bad. Uninspected, unacknowledged technical debt is always bad, right? And there's a meaningful difference, like you mentioned. Every organization that has moved fast incurs a technical debt, and so it's a intentional move. The question is not whether you have it. Everyone does, period. I think we should have said that. Everyone has some level of technical debt. The question is whether you know where it lives, who owns it, and whether you made the decision deliberately or by default, right? A
Correct.
deliberate debt, like you mentioned, is a tool, just like you have when you're getting credit to make an investment. You make a conscious trade. We will build this faster now, invest in the proper architecture later. Speed to market and other drivers are running that show, right? But accidental debt, the kind that accumulates because no one was watching and nobody was accountable, now that's a liability and that compounds silently until it becomes a crisis. So I've seen some organizations that have used technical debt strategically, right? They all share one characteristics. They treat it like financial debt. They track it, they assign an owner, they have a repayment plan, and they present it to board like a risk line. Not because it's catastrophic, right? But because invisible liabilities make poor strategic decisions inevitable. And this is decisions at the senior level. And that's something to watch out for.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you both.
Excellent.
And before we wrap up, is there one key point or takeaway that we can, like, you're summarizing of the topic that we discussed today?
Yeah, my key takeaway that I would say for tech leaders is that there's an opportunity here to move things differently in the future, but that opportunity is going to require courage, and it's going to require embracing both halves of your organization, the technical side as well as your human side, right? Culture and technology, and you can use AI to leverage the benefits of both. That'd be my takeaway for the conversation.
I have two takeaways. The first is, again, when you think about that, think about the layers, right? Two tend to go unnoticed most. The most critical one is that, yeah, literacy piece within the team that's doing the implementation. Keep a mind on that. That's my first sort of takeaway. The second one is sort of a simple tooling on how an organization can practically tackle technical debt, right? The answer is that most organizations don't want to hear is this. But fortunately, this is the answer. Start with governance, not the tooling, right? So in terms of a practical sequence, you want to make it visible. You cannot manage what you cannot see, right? Assign an owner, not the CTO alone, like Michael said, right? A cross-functional executive accountable for the modernization program, someone with authority to decommission, not just recommend, right? Third step, build a repayment plan, right? You know who owns it, you can be watching it, but nothing happens until you actually have a plan to sort of pay it down. And the fourth step, you want to, again, sort of full circle back to my initial recommendation, build literacy before you build infrastructure.
I love it. Great. Thank you both so much for being a part of this webinar. We thoroughly enjoyed hearing both perspectives and answering those excellent questions that came from the audience. For our next webinar, the topic is From Data Paralysis to Decision Intelligence. We'll be discussing how to shift from endless data prep to actionable AI that drives decisions. So stay tuned for details. Thanks again to both of you and for
You're
everyone
welcome.
else that joined.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks for the
Nancy. Thanks,
conversation.
everyone. Yes.